all the characteristics that we wanted in this apple were to make consumers happy. That is, it has to be crisp, juicy, and firm, and it has to be that way out of storage up to 12 months later.
That's Washington State University retired apple breeder Bruce Barritt. He was instrumental in developing the delicious Cosmic Crisp and Sunrise Magic apples. Welcome to Viewscapes, stories from Washington State Magazine, connecting you to Washington State University, the state, and the world. It's apple season. Magazine Associate Editor Adriana Janovich talked with Barritt about Cosmic Crisp, what makes good apples, and his apple breeding career.
I'm Bruce Barritt, and I'm a retired WSU faculty member from the Department of Horticulture. My work was at the Tree Fruit Research and Extension Center in Wenatchee. Almost 20 odd years, I was working on apples, first apple orchard systems, developing better ways of growing apples, and then finally for the last 14 years on developing new varieties for the Washington industry.
And you developed both of WSU's apples to go to market, and I'd like to talk about each one separately. What are their qualities? How are they different? Are there any similarities between the two apples?
Yeah, the first one is called WA2, and it has the trademark name of Sunrise Magic. It is a late apple. It's a salmon-colored pink apple, very firm, stores forever, is quite sweet. The second one, of course, is WA38, which is the big one, which is trademarked now as Cosmic Crisp. It will become a much bigger apple than WA2. WA2 is a good apple. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but so much money has been spent on Cosmic Crisp that the industry just doesn't have a lot of money to spend on another variety. WA2 will be planted, or Sunrise Magic will be planted, but it will never be as big as Cosmic Crisp.
Is it really unusual to be able to bring two apples to market during the course of a career or a lifetime? It seems like it is an unusual feat, like a big feat.
Well, not necessarily. A breeding program starts out and its desire is to introduce a new variety, but you've always got new material going into the breeding program. So the chances are that in a few years, maybe another good one will come along. So this was the case. WA2 came along first and then WA38. And they both met the criteria that we thought was important for the industry. So no, it's not that unusual. Most breeders, if they have a long career, will introduce many varieties. I had a relatively short career as a breeder, and so there are two at this point, but Cosmic Crisp will be the big one by far.
And what were some of those criteria? What were you looking for in a good apple?
This is the key. The motto of the program was put the consumer first, which means all the characteristics that we wanted in this apple were to make consumers happy. That is, it has to be crisp, juicy, and firm, and it has to be that way out of storage up to 12 months later. Most varieties will not be firm after a few months, 6 months maybe or more. Even in cold storage, they lose their firmness and they lose their flavor. Our goal was to have this firmness and flavor retained for up to 12 months in cold storage. And that's the major advantage of Cosmic Crisp. And it's needed in Washington State because we have a huge industry. We cannot market all our apples in the fall or even up until Christmas. It takes us a whole year to market all the apples. And so we had to have a variety that came out of cold storage almost any month of the year and was a very good eating experience. And the eating experience is based on both flavor, that is sugar and acid, or on texture. And texture is three things. It's firmness, it's crispness, and it's juiciness. And if you ask a consumer most of the time, they'll end up telling you that texture trumps flavor. It doesn't seem right, but it does. No one likes a soft apple. No one likes a chewy apple. And no one likes a dry apple. And so we wanted crisp, juicy, and firm. And that was the goal from the beginning. And I think with Cosmic Crisp, we're pretty darn close.
I think so. I just tried some of last year's harvest that had been on cold storage for almost a year now. And they still had the snap. They were still juicy. They were still crisp. They were still firm. They weren't soft at all. And it had been almost a year since they had been harvested.
That's unique, not your experience. The fact that Cosmic Crisp is that way is unique among varieties. There just are no varieties that I know of that can last a whole year and still be sweet, but they usually lose their acidity, and the acidity is what gives an apple flavor character, and they lose their firmness. But Cosmic Crisp does not, and that's its major claim to fame.
It's a miracle apple.
Yeah, okay.
Will you talk a little bit about the breeding process and what goes into developing a new variety, and just the amount of time it takes from cross to commercialization?
Yeah, the biggest question I get is, why does it take so long? Why did it take basically 22 years from the time we made the hybridization of two varieties until the consumer got to eat it? That's a long time. And it's a long time for a couple of reasons. One is biology. An apple, if you plant an apple seed and grow it into a tree, it won't have any fruit for 7 to 10 years. It's just slow. The second is propagation. To propagate a tree takes 3 years, basically. And so between the combination of very non-precocity, it doesn't take so long to fruit, and propagation, it just takes years and years. And also we have to test this new seedling, basically. We have to test it and retest it to be sure it has all the characteristics we want. And that just takes time. I think I should go back one step, though, and say that every apple variety that's ever been developed came from a seed. In an apple, there are roughly 10 seeds. If you planted those 10 seeds, they would produce 10 trees, and in about 7 to 10 years, you'd see the fruit. And every tree would be different. Just like if you had a dozen kids, they would all be different. Short, tall, redhead, blonde, different personalities, they'd be all different. And every apple tree that comes from a seed is different. And our job was to grow tens of thousands of seeds into trees that had fruit, look at those, and come up with those that we thought consumers would like. So it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, but it takes a long time to do it. So now your question was, how do we do it? We hybridize existing varieties, in this case, Honeycrisp and Enterprise. Each one of these varieties had something we liked. Honeycrisp was crisp and juicy. Enterprise would store quite well. It was a pretty rugged apple. It had good acidity. So we hybridized the two and selected, as I say, for ones that would store really, really well and come out of storage with all those 5 wonderful traits of sweet, tart, crisp, juicy, and firm.
At what point in that process did you know you had a real winner?
Well, there's no eureka moment. It's a very slow collection of data, year after year after year. You eat the apple, you taste it. Every year you get samples from different places in Central Washington, harvested at different times, and you rate them for all these fruit characteristics. And we record it all, and then at the end of the season, we look at all the data and said, this one's firm, this one's crisp, this one's juicy. And you do that year after year, starting with the original mother tree, the first tree, and then going through second trial, third trial, and so on until about 12 years later, you've said, oh, this one's got all the good stuff. This is the one we like.
And then you retired. What has it been like to be part of the hype and the media coverage with Cosmic Crisp, with the overall success of the apple? Have you been getting a lot of calls from people like me wanting to talk about Cosmic Crisp? And it's made headlines from LA to New York and Wenatchee and
Germany to all over the world.
Yeah.
That's pretty unusual. Apples don't usually get famous, at least not right away. I mean, Honeycrisp's famous now as an apple, but it took 25 years. It's rewarding. It's certainly rewarding that the years I spent doing it has produced something that consumers really like. And it's rewarding for the industry because here's something that they can grow that consumers really like. So in all respect, it's a good deal. The publicity is just a bonus. The fact that all the TV channels, all the major newspapers in North America have covered it. Also in the UK, there's magazines in Germany that have written 5-page articles on it. So it's really become important, and that, of course, helps the industry. It helps sell the apple. It helps WSU with its reputation. So it's good all the way around. We get to see all the articles that are published every week. It's clear that not everyone likes the same thing. Some people like tart apples, some people like sweet apples. Well, in this case, there are people who will review it in a podcast or somehow on YouTube or whatever, and some will find it wanting. And that's okay, because not everyone likes the same thing. But the vast majority of people want sweet and want tart and want firm, crisp, and juicy. And it's just a good enough apple that we've been getting terrific reviews. And that's good for the industry, good for WSU.
And it looks good too. I mean, it has that deep kind of crimson ruby red skin, and then the lenticels, which kind of look like starbursts. It's kind of it's very attractive apple, and it kind of reminds me of the whimsical apples in Wes Anderson's Fantastic Mr. Fox movie. It's such pleasing to the eye. I mean, it looks like something out of it almost looks like Too Good to Be True of an apple. It almost looks like, I mean, Fantastic Mr. Fox is an animation, and it almost looks like just like too perfect.
It's interesting because most apples look good on the outside, or else they don't get introduced. And as a matter of fact, growers used to get paid for how red the apple was and how good it was. But this apple is good from appearance point of view, on the outside, but also on the inside, because this apple does not go brown quickly. It's very, very slow to go brown. So that's an extra bonus. It's just as good on the inside as it is on the outside. Most other varieties, or many other varieties, they will go brown rather quickly.
With that long storage capacity, they're kind of perfect apples for a pandemic because they can store long in your refrigerator.
Yes, apples should always be put in the crisper section of a refrigerator. You shouldn't leave them out on the counter unless you don't want a beautiful bowl of apples. But generally speaking, they keep very, very well in a refrigerator. These apples keep extremely well. I've kept them in the refrigerator for many months. I retired in 2008. The breeding program didn't end then. As a matter of fact, it took about 10 years almost 10 years after that to get the variety commercialized. And when I retired, Kate Evans joined WSU as the apple breeder, and we worked together on all aspects of commercialization to make sure that it got patented, got trademarked. It got all the things, the legal issues that are needed, it got propagated, and so on, so that it went smoothly. But it still took almost a decade from the time we knew it was going to be a good variety until it got into the hands of consumers. But Kate Evans has been a big part of that. The thing is that these things take so long. I mean, it was, in a sense, it was my baby, and I wanted to be sure that it got into the hands of consumers.
Which apple do you like better, the Cosmic Crisp or Sunrise Magic, or what are your favorite eating apples?
Well, in public, I never compare apple varieties. I think that's up to the individual. Those two apples are both very good. Neither of them ever go soft, which is my biggest concern. Soft apples are no good. No one likes soft apples. Sunrise Magic is more sweet and less tart. Some people don't like too much tartness, so they'll probably like Sunrise Magic better. But the people who like a little character in their apples, a little acidity, they'll probably like Cosmic Crisp the best. I eat apples every day. I try to find the best ones in the stores that are not soft, because most apples go soft after a while. But our whole point of doing this was not to have these apples go soft. I'm encouraged that most of the professionals who have worked with the apple find it to be quite desirable in that it doesn't go mushy. It stays reasonably firm, but not hard. Some people like Granny Smith to make a pie. Well, those pieces never go soft. But Cosmic Crisp sort of mellows a little bit, but it doesn't go mushy. And it has enough acidity that you probably don't need to put any lemon juice in your pie.
Yeah, and it holds its shape. I've used it with apples, onions, and pork, and it's really good that way too, or even with chicken. It's good in a savory dish as well as, a cake or pie or a galette, a sweet dish too. I like that it's versatile like that, and you can use it both ways, and it holds its shape, and it stands up to the meat, the protein, or the cake or the pie.
You know, we put the consumer first in our in our objectives, but primarily that was for fresh market, because that's where most of the apples go from Washington State. The fact that it does reasonably well, or actually does very well, in processed products is a real bonus as well. It's a bonus like the fact that it doesn't go brown quickly. The fact that it does really well in desserts is a real bonus as well.
What are your hopes for Kate Evans and the breeding program now? How do you still work as a consultant?
Well, certainly I keep in touch, but when I left, I felt that Kate needed to do her own thing. And so she will certainly have promising selections come along that will get all the full testing, just like Honeycrisp did. And I have no doubt that there will be very good varieties coming from the program down the road.
It's just so surprising to me, given that Washington is known for its apples, and we grow so much of the world's fresh market of apples, that these two apples from WSU are our first apples developed in Washington State. I couldn't believe that. I just figured that we had developed our own apples before. It's history making what you did.
Yeah, the story is in 1981, when I started at Wenatchee at WSU at the research center, I had to come up with a job. I was hired as an horticulturalist, but no one told me what to do, but it was for the apple industry. So I looked at it and I said, oh, there's two issues. One, they're growing great big trees, very inefficient. There's no light in the trees. The fruit quality is not very good. The yields are low. They need to come up with more efficient orchards. That was one thing. And I said, well, I can do that. I can help them do that. The second thing was they were growing Red Delicious and Golden Delicious, but the two of them were over 90% of the market. And they seemed to be growing more and more of them, and consumers were liking them less and less. And so I said, okay, the second thing we need to do is we need to come up with new varieties. But I knew the industry wasn't ready. I asked growers, why are you still planting Red Delicious? And the answer was, we grow a better Red Delicious than anybody else. Well, that was true, but the fact was it wasn't a very good Red Delicious in the first place. Red Delicious wasn't a very good apple in the first place. So why grow more and more? So I knew that the industry wasn't ready. I began, about 1988, 1989, I began to try to convince WSU that we should have a breeding program. And eventually they came around. The dean at the time was Dean Zeitzes, and he was also the director of research before that. And he believed, yes, we needed to be doing that. But budgets were terrible. There was no way of hiring a plant breeder to do such a work. And he said, yeah, we could do it, but you got to have money. And so then I went to the industry and I said, okay, we need to do this. And it took 6 years of lobbying to convince them that we should do it. And in 1994, they finally said, okay, we'll give you some money for that. So that's how it started. It took like 13 years from when I first had the idea before we got the industry and the university to agree to do it. Then 14 years later, I retired, but 22 years later, we had the variety in the mouths of consumers.
That is a long road for one apple or two apples.
Yeah, it is. It's a slow process. Yeah, it's interesting that this apple is going to become an international sensation as well. Even though we grow 70% of the apples in the U.S. and we will have a leg up on everyone else for 10 years. That's an advantage because the industry actually, contributed. They paid money. They taxed themselves for research, and so they paid for the development of the variety partially. I mean, not all by any means, but partially. And so they've been given a 10-year advantage over anyone else in North America. But it's being licensed, though, abroad. For example, it's being grown commercially now in northern Italy. It will be marketed in Europe, but there'll be no competition because we don't market in Europe. So, and that's going to happen all over the world, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, everywhere in the world where the apple grows well, we'll be growing Honeycrisp at some point. Well, that's rewarding, and it's good for WSU's reputation as well.
What a huge legacy.
Well, the legacy is interesting and complicated. The legacy is achieved in a number of ways. First of all, the industry gets to be successful with the product. Consumers get to eat something they really like. Those are the practical, that's a practical legacy. But there's also a financial legacy, and that's through royalties. Every Cosmic Crisp tree, and Sunrise Magic tree as well, every one of those trees, there's a royalty charged. And that money goes into a royalty fund that comes to WSU. And also when a box of apples is sold, there's a royalty charged on that. And that royalty also, a portion of it comes to WSU. So the royalty there is that money, and it'll be very substantial, in the millions and millions of dollars. That money comes to WSU and can be used to support the apple breeding program. In fact, the industry supported the breeding program until the royalties started coming in. And then now it's become WSU's responsibility. But the program can be advanced. It can be improved. It can hire more people. It can have better labs for doing evaluations, better storage for evaluating fruit. It can do all these things, grow more seedlings. And everything can be enhanced by having this royalty money, including training more graduate students, for example. So there are many, many aspects to the legacy, which I'm very, very pleased about, because I'm pleased that we can now afford to have a really good, matter of fact, a world class, perhaps the best in the world, right here in Washington State.
It is paving the way for more research and other apples and just the future of the program.
Hopefully it'll be the world class tree fruit genetics and breeding program right here in Washington State. So it will be, I think, in time, based on the amount of royalty money that comes in.
And then just for fun, what have you been doing in your retirement?
I've been watching Cosmic Crisp grow. No, that's my primary interest, of course, has been to make sure that it gets commercialized and so on. But, if I don't go to work every day, I can do other things. I play golf, and we travel a lot, and we have grandchildren in all over the world. So, I'm busy.
Thank you for joining me today.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you for listening to Viewscapes. Music is by Greg Yazanitsky. You can read more about Cosmic Crisp and Sunrise Magic Apples and many other WSU stories at magazine.wsu.edu.